I cannot sew. True story. Many years ago, I wanted to sew on a scrapbook page because that was all the rage. Still is, in fact, I think. I had to call my neighbor up to help her thread the machine I bought just for that purpose. I think we've pulled out the machine 2 more times in about 20 years. But I can make cards with sewing themes. Today, I am going to share 3 cards with you featuring some really fun sewing related and quilting related and fabric related themes. And the cards are adorable. I don't usually crank out this many in a video, but they are really cute and I can't wait to share them with you. Plus at the end, I'll tie it up with a nice little design review and send you on your way. To see those card projects, stick around. That video is coming up next. To get started today, I am going to use the So Fun dies, and I also have this Quilted Squares texture die, and I've already applied this to a piece of 110-pound cardstock, and I've done all of my die cutting ahead of time just to save, just to save some time. You know what die cutting is. Now we glue. Now I do love an easy paper piecing project, and this die set is so easy to put together. I'm using Connect Glue for all of my gluing, and it's pretty easy to put together. I wanted to have a spool, however, that looked like the other spools I had die cut, so I did this from some craft paper, and to get a straight edge, I'm just cutting it with my mini guillotine, and then I'm going to glue it right on top there so that it's not pink. I thought that was kind of smart of me to do. I don't know. Anyone? Yes? All right, we're going to keep building. Putting the base on here, and this is going to be a very monochromatic card today. I am using the same colors for pretty much everything I'm going to share today. Now these little accent pieces, they come on a single die and they're numbered on the die, and they're also numbered here on this pink, the dark pink layer die cut. So it's a paint by numbers, so to speak, but with die cut pieces. And I love that Waffle Flower does things like that just to make it easier to assemble a paper pieced project. Isn't that cute though? All right, thread goes on. Now I'm only going to put the glue right onto the part that hits the spool, because that will stay in place, and then I'm going to wrap that thread around the back of the machine and have it come through just like that. Isn't that cute? And I'll worry about adhering that later. I've got 3 different cardstocks here, and I'll have all the supplies that I'm using linked. These are mostly Concord and 9th cardstocks, but we're going to have 3. And the funny thing is, I'm not going to use any of these for this card. It'll all make sense. This stamp set is called the Quilted Hugs, and they are stamps and dies, and they all just have sweet sewing related and quilting related greetings. And I'm going to prime these just a bit because they're new. And I'll powder up with some anti-static powder. And I'm going to stamp and emboss these today in gold because I'm using these warm side of the rainbow colors, and oftentimes I like to do gold embossing when I have that. Plus, there's little gold details that are going to be added to the finished project. Sprinkling on my Brutus Monroe powder. This is gilded. And we'll get all the excess off. And that looks great. I'll heat it and melt it till it's smooth, shiny, and, well, golden. Gilded, one might say. And that looks great. I've got the coordinating dies for this stamp set. They are also numbered, the dies themselves, so it's nice and easy to quickly look at the stamp index sheet and the number on the die if you ever get confused. I love that. But we cut those out for a little extra behind the greetings. Now I'm going to trim this panel down a little bit. I want this to have a crop so that it can be popped up on a note card. And that right there with the little piece of fabric looks like a good fit. So I will run this through my machine to trim down this little textured pattern. Again, I use the Quilted Square texture die for that. And then I'll pop that up with some foam tape and then just come up with my arrangement. Now, I don't know if you've noticed there, but my little piece of fabric, it has that quilted texture die. I just ran the die cut through to get sort of that matching look. Here, I'm going to place this down using my ruler as centered as I can. I wanted it to look, Well, I was having a hard time actually visualizing if it was centered, but you know what? We're going for it because we've stuck it down, it's popped up a little, and then I have foam squares on the piece of fabric as well. I'll put a little glue on everything, but that glue at the top is to hold that as it's coming right out of the sewing machine. And I use the same cardstock color as my thread. See? See, I'm always thinking. I may not know how to thread that machine in real life, but I certainly know how to do it with the die cut. Then I'm popping up "You're the thread that keeps me together." I think that's so cute. Well, it's not really popped up. It's just sitting on the fabric, but then I had that spools of thread and I was thinking, how do I make this work? And you know what? It's okay to lay everything out. It's okay to do things and put it all down, but sometimes you just can start taking things away, and I didn't think it worked. Instead, I'm using these 3 pieces of gold. Well, I've got gold scissors and the thimble and the little safety pin, and I cut those out from some matte gold cardstock from Simon Says Stamp, and that is what ties it all together. And that's the finished card. Cute, huh? All right, moving on to the second one. This is the Fabric Lover die and stencil, and it comes with the kitty die and then 3 different stencils that are going to let you layer in color. So what I wanted to do was work basically with the same colors, but I wanted my cat to be, well, for lack of a better word, Franklin themed. And for those of you who don't know Franklin, Franklin's my grand kitty, and he's gray and black and he has a white face. So I always use him as my de facto cat model. Anyway, we're adding on some colors. You just pick up the stencil, move it up, and I'm bringing in a little darker ink, and this is Mushroom. I think the first one was Pebble, perhaps. And we're slowly building up the kitty. I really like little stencil sets. This is a great set. Number 1, if you like cats. Number 2, if you like fabric. But also, it's a small layered stencil set that's really easy to use. You don't need to clean it off in between your pieces that you're adding to your particular layer. You just go until the first element is done. Now, I did bring in a little bit of acetate just to mask off the face area. I thought his ears should be pink on the inside. I don't actually think Franklin's ears are pink on the inside. They're more sort of a beige tone, but that's not as cute. So yeah, we're just gonna go for it. And here I just wanted to add a little bit of gray, just what was left over on my brush to give it a little shape. I could have left it white, to be honest, because I'm going to be popping in a pink nose and some gray eyes, and I'm going to be doing that off camera because, well, you'll see, I forgot to film it. Anywho, we're moving on to the next layer. So this is the top blanket layer, and we're doing all the base layers of the blanket at one time. I'm going to start with my lighter shades, pinks, and my pale orange and my palish yellow. And we're going to get all these down first. And again, it doesn't have to be fancy or blendy or shady. Do you know what I mean? You can just lay down the color because we're going to have the last layer provide some cute little accents. And here we get this lined up. I'm adding this ink. This is Buttercup. I think I'm using all Concord and Ninth inks for this. And we're just coming in here. Buttercup is a little hotter in tone than the first 2 that I used, so I just tapped a little off first. Isn't that cute? And then the last stencil is where you bring in the details, and I'm doing a tone on tone, but just picking a darker shade in each of my 3 colors so that the tonal match is there, but there's a little bit of difference in color. And the last one comes down. Sunflower is a bit of a hot color too, so I swirled a lot of it off before bringing it to the paper. I think the more you work with inks, the more you know which ones are going to come in a little bit darker, and you can adjust your pressure through the stencil. Isn't that cute? I popped out the eyes, and off camera I cut out some gray eyes and a pink nose and popped those in to place. But I forgot to turn on the camera, so they're there, trust me. Now I've got this piece of cardstock. I used that same plate and added it to the pink. And now we're using the Coordinating Quilted Squares stencil. But what I'm going to do here is just a tone on tone. I'm going to use honeysuckle ink on this cardstock, which I believe is Cotton Candy from Simon Says Stamp, and just lay down a quick wash. Starting with a colored cardstock base is a really great way to give yourself a head start and makes adding a second color really, really quite easy. And when I peel and reveal this, it looks really pretty. So you don't have to get real fancy with it, but isn't that kind of cute? So to assemble everything, I want to crop this card down. Now I cut myself this little circle of vellum. I tried white cardstock first and I didn't like it. And I thought the vellum is just going to be nice to serve as like a grounding area for my greeting and my focal image. So I trimmed this down with one of my dies and I was hoping that it would hold and kind of seal that vellum in. I am going to have to add a little extra glue, but I found a use for the thread spools. And I did put liquid glue along the edge there, but isn't that cute? I was just happy to find a place for the little threads of spool or spool of threads. All right, we're moving on. Next, I wanted to use the So Fun stencil postal collage. I hadn't done a postal collage in a while, and this one's really cute. Now, I will tell you, on the stencils, it tells you what colors to use. And this is what I say to everyone if you're getting a product that's new and you're not sure what to do, just follow the guides on the stencil. They're going to help you figure it out. In fact, at one point, I sort of deviated and then I realized I made a mistake, but you know what? You're not even going to notice in the end. I just followed the guide. I did bring in a smaller brush here with this pebble ink just to add a little depth to my scissors. But here, where it tells you to do pink, well, it says pink and gray, so I assumed gray goes on the scissors, and the rest of this is going to be pink. So all the same inks that I've been using today, the pinks and the oranges, and of course, I love these colors. I did decide to try to bring in a little bit of darkness to add some shading to these elements, but you certainly wouldn't have to. I just tried to get a little bit darker at the base. Now here with this little sewing machine, if there's ever a place that's a little delicate and you don't want your brush to go over and under, just hold it in place with your craft pick, and then you can just wipe your craft pick down if you end up getting ink on it. But sometimes it's kind of hard to hold those little pieces down. But isn't that cute? All right, moving on. We're going into the creamsicle. And again, I'm going to add a little shading and depth as I can with my brush, just having it be a little darker at the bottom. Little thread of spool. Why can't I say that? Spool of thread. I like thread of spool though. I'd like to see that catch on, if I'm being honest. But we're moving on, and I think it's coming together beautifully. These are so fun too, because once you have all the pieces, you don't have to use them as one full piece. You can cut everything apart with your paper trimmer and turn them into individual stamps. There are many ways to use the Postal collage system, and they are always releasing new designs and new concepts that are all sized to work with this type of thing. Now, here's the thing. I got to the cat and I'm like, I don't want my cat to be orange, but I should have made my cat orange. I don't know why I made his face gray. I don't know. I was getting confused. This cat, not Frankie. Doesn't look like Frankie. I decided to make him sort of a brown tone because when you mix those colors together, it's kind of beige-ish. It's going to work out. My darker orange here is the clementine, and it does say on the stencil, dark orange. So bringing all those in, bringing that cat's stripes out, and I thought that looked really good. The last color said to use red, but what I wanted to do was just kind of follow my gut here. I wanted my threads to match the color of the spools, and then I brought in honeysuckle, which was to serve as my red. So you can always substitute a color that's still in the shade range that you're working, just go with a darker version, and that's what honeysuckle is. So all these little extra details, and here's a funny story. I wasn't perfectly lined up, and I realized it as I was blending. I'm like, I don't want to start over. I've gone too far. I'm already making 3 cards today. So I just looked at each square individually and finished the blending that way. I think I have to move it one more time, but you know, you got to move it sometimes. You got to move it. But I do like the pink handled scissors. I think that's really cute. And then in here, finishing out with the honeysuckle for the top layer of the blankets. And we are almost done with our blending. Ta-da! But are we? Are we done? Well, let's see. Time to stamp some details. Now there is a coordinating little set. And here's the cute thing. That's where the kitty's face is. So you could draw it on if you didn't have these stamps. I know a lot of you are pretty handy with the pen, but I do think it's cute that the little eyes and nose, you just stamp them on. I grabbed some black dye ink and just gave it a couple taps to get his little face. And now I'm going to add some other details from this little stamp set. I'm going to use 3 to create a nice little visual triangle of black. I'm going to prime these 2 because they're brand new, and then use the same black dye ink. This is just Gina K Designs Black Onyx. I love this little cube for little stamps. It works great. It dries so quickly, and you are good to go. So 2 more there, and stamp it down. And there are 3 extra details. I'm also going to add the prices, and I did not know this. They are called denominations. I think I'll tell you that later in the video, but I didn't know they were called. I don't know if there's like a more formal word, but those are the stamp prices, and they're not even perfectly straight. But I brought in my original postage collage stencil because I thought they needed a little bit of defining each of the stamped areas. And you can do this with this original set. It's really great because very little ink is needed to do this. And even if you get more ink than you need, I think it's going to turn out great. So I'm using a very light hand with the pink lemonade just to define the edges of each individual scene, if you will. Now I'm going to peel back my stencil here just to see what it looked like. And I thought I could use a little more up top. So before releasing it, so it's still in the perfect space, well, I needed more at the bottom actually. There we go. See how it just kind of makes it come alive a little more? Now I've cut a panel of 80-pound cardstock because I'm going to seal this right onto my note card, but I'm using the outer edge to create that sort of postal looking line all the way around. I'm just going to use the 2 colors, pink lemonade and the creamsicle, to create that look. And you don't have to worry about your ink going inside those openings because once you lay down the postage piece that you create, it hides those and you don't even see it. You're only going to see the edge, and I think that's very smart design. So we're blending it on, and look at that. Looks like a hot mess, but then, oh, isn't that cute? I think this came together really well. I love the greeting, "You're the thread that keeps me together." So let's take a look at all 3 cards for a little design review. Here are the 3 finished cards, and as you can see, I definitely worked a common color palette, but let's look at each one individually. Slide you out, and here is the first card. So we have the monochromatic theme basically with the pinks, and then of course we have our little gold accents. We have our greeting, which also has the gold. And actually one of the things I may do after the fact is put a thicker stack of foam square underneath this to keep it nicely elevated, but I may not. Now I'm going to bring in my rule of thirds and show you. This will help visualize. This is really just a centered design, right? Everything sort of fits right within the quadrants, all 9 of them. Of course, our greeting intersects these 2 cross points here, which is an area of visual interest, and that's a great place to put your greeting. Any of those little crossing lines is a nice place for that. So really it's very, in a sense, it's almost symmetrical because it's one sort of piece. There is a little stuff happening right over here, our cute little golds, but we do have a nice bit of repetition here and lots of nice open space on the edges. I really love how this card turned out, and I think it's really sweet. I love this greeting. As you see, I've used it twice today. Set that there for now. Oh, got some threads here. Of course, here we again have the common colors. We're working with the pinks, oranges, and yellows. And of course, these are analogous colors, right? So when you look at the color wheel, let's wheel it around here. and you go from pinks to oranges to yellows, these follow one another on the color wheel. So they're always going to be harmonious. There's not going to be any color that stands out and says, that one looks bad. And of course, we used darker shades of each of those tones to create the details on the blanket that, well, I'm just going to call it, it's Franklin, that my kitty is laying on. As we put this on, you'll see again where these 2 points intersect. Our greeting is sandwiched nicely in there. Now, viewing this in terms of thirds, there is more visual weight in the two outer columns as opposed to the column on the left. This technically is more of an asymmetrical design because the thread spools really shift it off to one side, but it's still very balanced. And even though this is a center weighted design, we have our vellum lightly drawing the eye over along with the threads. But again, everything is connected together, and I think that's important to keep in mind when you are thinking of where to place things. Make sure that nothing feels like an outlier, like to put a spool of thread over here just floating by itself would not have made as much sense. These have a connection to the center, and that makes the design feel unified and finished. All right, one more card. Here again, we have analogous colors. I did sort of mess up the kitty's face. I wanted his face to be lighter, but a cat could look like that. It really could. I was trying to work in more gray, and then it just kind of got muddy, but you know what? It's going to be fine. This design has a lot going on, but I loved using one of those early postage stencils. In fact, I think that's from the very first release, but I thought that was a really fun look for a postcard. And we have things working in three. I wanted to do black and white for the greeting because of the black ink details stamped on the card. And of course, you'll see 1, 2, 3 of the postage amounts. I know there's a term for that, but I don't know what it is. 1, 2, 3 of the graphic amounts and 1, 2, 3 of the spools as well. So we have little counts of 3 tying this design together. All in all, today's cards were very fun to create, and I don't normally do this many at one time, meaning especially cards that have a lot of detail and interest, but I really wanted to show those of you who love sewing and thread and quilting this release from Waffle Flower because it's really charming, it's really fun to work with, and I guess my final design tip would be when you get something new and you're not sure how it's going to turn out, number one, set limits for your colors. Here I said pink, orange, and yellow, and that's it. Work within whatever your happy palette is and see what shakes out or sews out. You can find links to all of the products I used in today's video in the YouTube description box. I'll also have a blog post where you can check out more photos and see the supply list over there at the end of the blog post. If you're not a subscriber to my channel, I'd love to have you, so please hit that subscribe button and be sure to hit the notification bell so that you don't miss the next time I post. Here's another video you might be interested in checking out, and I will see you in that clip.